In the previous section of Wife of Bath's prologue, we have learned that Wife of Bath was already married to Jenkin, but it didn't turn out to be a very fairy tale wedding, fairy tale marriage, as she thought it to be. But Jenkin turned out to be a misogynistic and violent man. And there was also an example of a Roman man called Sulphius Gallus, who divorced his wife because she dared to step out of the house without covering her head with a veil. And now we wonder from where do this tradition of misogyny and a very violent patriarchy come in the Middle Ages. And this section kind of answers that question. The name of this section was a pretty long one. Old men should read books and young men should play with their wives. But let's call this section Jenkin and his Book of Wicked Wives. The line numbers remain the same from 653 to 716. So with that we begin this section. A rather long section which is very important because of the many literary references that are important and which tells us from where Chaucer drew his sources. So with that, let's just begin with the text. Another Roman he told of by name, who, since his wife was at a summer game, without his knowing, he forsook her eke. So, besides Sulpicius Gallus, that previous Roman man, which Jenkins says in the previous section that he divorced his wife because she dared to step out of the step out on the doorstep without covering her hair with veil. And this is another man, another example he gives, another Roman who divorced his wife because she went to this summer game, a sporting event, without his permission. So with these two references, two example very close to each other, Jenkin, who is the fifth husband of Wife of Bath, he is actually threatening Wife of Bath with examples of men who divorced their wives for such trivial reasons. And one of them is to incite some fear in Wife of Bath, because as in the previous sections she said that she was still going out from house to house because she loved gossiping. And her husband, the fifth husband Jenkin, never wanted her to go out of the house like that. So Jenkin is now threatening Wife of Bath with with examples of men who divorced their wives for trivial reasons. And then would he within his Bible seek that proverb of the old ecclesiast, where he commands so freely and so fast that man forbid his wife to gad about. So after that, after these two examples of Roman men who left their wives for trivial reasons because they never listened to their husbands or did something without their permission, and now Jenkin turns to the Bible. He looks into the Bible to find that proverb, some kind of a proverb that say men should not let their wives go out and do whatever she likes. And this is one recurring theme that happens many times in Wife of Bath prologue. Like patriarchy and religion, they both back each other. So the same thing happened here when Jenkin cannot force his opinion on Wife of Bath. He turns to the Bible to give her some examples from the Bible. This is patriarchy turning to religion for support. This is a recurring theme in this prologue. Then would he thus repeat with never doubt, whoso would build his whole house out of sallows and spur his blind horse to run over fallows, and let his wife alone go seeking hallows, is worthy to be hanged upon the gallows. So this proverb Jenkin digs out from the Bible. This is another misogynistic is a proverb, and Jenkin would quote this to Wife of Bath. He tries to preach this proverb. It says that the man who builds his house with straws, or uses a blind horse to plow his fields, or lets his wife go alone by herself, these men should be hanged. Now, the man who builds his house with straws will lead to some kind of calamity. So is the same with a man who uses a blind horse to plow his fields. And the same is with the man who lets his wife go out wherever she wants to. All three events are supposed to lead to some kind of calamities. Now, wives, it says, it's a misogynist proverb which says wives shouldn't be left alone and should be protected and guarded and ordered by the husband. And of course, like many other proverbs, these are very derogatory comments on women, as proverbs, as a part of the popular culture in medieval times, they propagated the misogyny that existed in the society. But all for naught, I didn't care a haw for all his proverbs, nor for his old saw, nor yet would I by him corrected be. I hate one that my vices tells to me, and so do more of us, God knows, than I. This made him mad with me, and furiously that I'd not yield to him in any case. So, wife of Bath says that I didn't care a haw, I didn't give a damn about his proverbs, and I'll mind my own business, and I'll not let him tell me or dictate me what I have to do, nor yet would I by him corrected be. I will not let him tell me what is correct and what is not. That is my business. I'll not let him tell me what's wrong and what's right. And she says, I hate one that my vices tells to me. So I hate it when people point out my faults. Like this, nobody wants, nor any man, nor any woman. But this is not like asking for liberty, going out for gossip. These are not women's faults, but rather it is patriarchy, the patriarchal beliefs of the society, which forces women to look at their own liberty of choice, of action, as a sin, as a vice. So, although wife of Bath says that I don't want Jenkin to point out my vices, I hate it when someone points out my mistake. This is not a mistake. The women's liberty cannot be their mistake, but patriarchy makes them believe so. And she says, I did not yield to him in any case. So this made Jenkin very furious with wife of Bath, but she says that she will not succumb to his threats. So she is kind of the resistance. Now will I tell you truth by Saint Thomas, of why I tore from out his book a leaf, for which he struck me so hard it made me deaf. So as you remember in the previous section, wife of Bath already told us of this incident of domestic violence that happened in her marriage with Jenkin, that one day she tore a page from one of his books, and Jenkin, he hit her so hard on the ear in one of her ears that she became permanently deaf in that year. So she's going back to that incident and explaining it further, like why she actually tore the page from the book. And this is kind of where the main section begins, where wife of Bath tells us about Jenkin and his book of evil wives. First, she swears by St. Thomas Becket. This is the St. Thomas of Canterbury. He was a bishop who was martyred inside his own cathedral by the king's men. That happened in 1170, and this place, that cathedral, has now become a shrine, and it was a holy place for pilgrimage. And this whole story of Canterbury Tales is about the pilgrims, Chaucer, wife of Bath, and other pilgrims going to this shrine, this holy place, and this is the pilgrimage to Canterbury. So now she swears by this Saint Thomas, and she says that I'll tell you the truth why I tore the pages from that book, for which he hit me so hard that it made me deaf in one of my ears. He had a book that gladly night and day for his amusement he would read alway. He called it Theophrastus and Valerius, at which book would he laugh uproarious. And two there sometime was a clerk at Rome, a cardinal that men called Saint Jerome, who made a book against Jovinian. So as you can now see, Wife of Bath is giving references from inside that book which Jenkins had, and these are also references which Chaucer used, which is important in Chaucer's times. And these literary references now becomes very important while studying this Wife of Bath's prologue. So Jenkins had this book which he read all day and night for his amusement, and he would often laugh hilariously, uproariously while reading that book. So what is in that book are these references. First is of Theophrastus and Valerius, and the cardinal of Rome, the clerk of Rome, the cardinal Saint Jerome. So three references: Theophrastus, Valerius, and Saint Jerome. And all three references are either famous anti-women writers of that age or anti-women work, popular anti-women work of the medieval age. So Jenkins was reading these anti-women writers, and that was the source of his misogyny. And Jenkins, being an educated clerk from Oxford, reading these misogynistic works, we can understand that these works were very popular with men who read in Chaucer's times, and these books propagated the misogyny, the patriarchy. Individual references: Theophrastus and Valerius, these were anti-marriage texts. These texts told you how bad it is to marry and why people shouldn't marry. So these were anti-marriage texts. Saint Jerome was a famous scholar who had very harsh views on women and sexuality. So this is another misogynistic man who made a book against Jovinian. So Jovinian is from the different side, the opposite side. Jovinian was a saint, and Jovinian, he felt that virgins, widows, and married women, even remarried widows, all these women are of equal merit in Christian community. So Jovinian was kind of a more liberal saint, and his views were attacked by this man called Saint Jerome. So Saint Jerome again becomes a saint who propagates misogyny. So all these three, Theophrastus, Valerius, and Saint Jerome, are anti-women writers or anti-women texts. In which book too there was Tertullian, Chrysippus, Trotula, and Heloise, who was abbess near Paris diocese. So again, three references. Tertullian was an early Christian author who wrote in praise of chastity, modesty, and monogamy. And obviously these ideas, which were religious and patriarchal ideas, were very popular in the Middle Ages. Chrysippus was a Greek philosopher who believed, Greek philosopher not belonging to the Christian age, and he believed that wise men should marry. But again, his views were condemned by Saint Jerome, like the Jovinian, like whoever speaks for men, for women, whoever speaks kind of a liberal views, Saint Jerome will attack his work. Trotula was a female physician, and Heloise was a French nun, and she was one of the first feminist representation in French literature and culture. So Jenkin had these books about wicked women, and Trotula, who is one of the first female physician, and Heloise, who was a first of feminist representation. These women must have been some women who would be wicked in contemporary societal views, who would be the wicked women in Jenkin's book of Wicked Women. So these are all the references that Chaucer draws randomly from what is popular, and from this we can understand that these were popular names, popular works or writers or figures in Chaucer's times. And to the Proverbs of King Solomon and Ovid's art on the Book of Love and King Solomon's Proverbs, and and books full many a one, all of these were bound in one volume. So this book, it was a collection of books bound in one volume. It contained various writings from a number of different writers. And from this book, Jenkin loved to read the parts which propagated the sense of misogyny and were about wicked women. We'll get more about the wicked women in the later sections also. And every night and day it was his custom, when he had leisure and took some vacation from all his other worldly occupation, to read within this book of wicked wives. So this is the book of wicked wives, and whenever Jenkin had any leisure, any free time, he would read this book about evil women. And we understand that these medieval books, these medieval volumes, reflected, of course, the misogyny of this age. He knew of them more legends and more lives than are of good wives written in the Bible. For trust me, it is impossible, no libel, that any cleric shall speak well of wives, unless it be of saints and holy lives, but not for other women will they do. So Jenkin, he read this book of wicked wives so much that he knew more about these wicked women than all the good women written about in the Bible. It was as if his hobby to read about these wicked women and books which derogated women. And Wife of Bath says that, trust me, that any cleric shall speak well of wives. So nobody is going to write about the good sides, the virtues of women, unless she is a saint. So only if she is a saint, there can be books about that women. But for other women, secular women, normal women, nothing good can be said. Because men and patriarchy, they controlled the narrative of this age. They controlled what is going to be written and what is not going to be written, because all the clerics, all the scholars and monks who wrote books in this age were all men. And they decided, these men, they were the ones who decided who is virtuous and who is vain and a sinner. And of course, all women were vain and sinners unless she was a saint. If she was a saint, she belonged to the domain of religion, she would never marry and she would be a nun, and then something good can be written about her. But for other women, nothing good can be written because men controlled the narrative. Who painted first the lion? Tell me who. Like, who called the lion a savage beast? Like, is it the lion itself? The lion never comes out and tells us that, look, I am a savage beast. But the fact that the lion is a savage beast is only human representation. When we look at it from a human perspective, from human point of view, then the lion becomes savage. So this is the politics of representation. Like, you become someone according to who you are represented by. And in that way, when it comes to the representation of women, Women were vain and sinners. Why? Because men controlled their representation. Men told us how women were. If women could actually talk for themselves, could actually write for themselves, which they were not allowed to do, then they won't call themselves sinners and vain. Because it is men who controls this politics, who controls the representation. They controlled how women are going to be represented, that women came to be known as vain, who were sinners, who were unfaithful in their marriages, who were fickle minded, and all these which men calls women. By God, if women had but written stories, as have these clerks within their oratories, they would have written of men more wickedness than all the race of Adam could redress. So, this is exactly what she says, that if women actually could write these books, these stories, if women could write about themselves and not the clerks, the men clerks and the men scholars in their monasteries, in their own worlds, then women could have written so much about men's wickedness, they could have written so much about men's crimes, that the men's race, the race of Adam, which is the man's race, could never redress, could never answer all the crimes that they have committed, all the wickedness that men are. But women are not allowed to write books. Women are not allowed to become clerks. Women are not allowed to become scholars. So everything is controlled by men. And how women would be represented, therefore, was also controlled by men. So medieval women, they existed in a world where everything, art, literature, religion, society, family, and everything was controlled by men. And it was a very systematic oppression. Like, why were women represented the way they are? Like vain, unfaithful, and wicked, because they are represented by men. Why are they represented by men? Because men are scholars and clerics. And why are men scholars and clerics? Because women are not allowed to be any of them. So it was a very systematic oppression that happened all along the Middle Ages. And along with calling women vain and unfaithful and whatever, this whole history of men's crimes, the whole history of men's wickedness had been very conveniently hidden and buried. That history of men, that dark history of men's crimes in this Middle Ages were very conveniently hidden, because it is only men who are writing all the literature and books. So men will not speak about their own crime. Men will only speak the negative things about women. So men's crimes and the history of men's crimes and wickedness gets hidden and buried. The children of Mercury and of Venus are in their lives antagonistic thus. For Mercury loves wisdom and science, and Venus loves but pleasure and expense, because they different dispositions own. So now Wife of Bath shifts to the differences between the genders. Men are called the children of Mercury and women are called the children of Venus. And one of the previous section, Wife of Bath also calls herself the one of the child of Venus, because Venus is her guiding star. And they say that they are antagonistic. They are men and women. They are polar opposites, and they are also often hostile to each other. And she says that men love wisdom, science, and knowledge, while women, they love pleasure and fun. Because they are opposites, they also have different temperaments. But this is only generalizations, and this is a very stereotypical picture, stereotyping the genders, stereotyping men and women. And Wife of Bath uses astrology to make this stereotyping. each falls when others in accident shone. And God knows Mercury is desolate in Pisces when wherein Venus rules in state, and Venus falls when Mercury is raised. So, because men are children of Mercury and women are children of Venus, they are antagonistic to each other, polar opposites, and each suffers when the other rise. And wife Bath uses this medieval belief of astrology to represent the gender and the relationship between the genders. She says that when Venus and therefore women are on the rise, Mercury and men will suffer. They will be desolate. And when Mercury will rise, Venus will fall. So, this is how she represents the difference of the genders. Therefore, no woman by a clerk is praised. A clerk, when he is old and cannot do of Venus labors worth his worn out shoe, then sits he down and writes in his dotage that women cannot keep vows of marriage. Now, women were portrayed as unfaithful, women were portrayed as cheaters when it comes to marriages and relationships. Women cheat men. This was propagated in an age which was full of misogyny, full of this misogyny. And Wife of Bath ends this section with a very vulgar, scathing attack on how this representation work. She says that clerks and scholars, they will never praise a woman in their books because all scholars are men. And why do they call these women unfaithful, and why do they say that women cannot keep the vows on marriage? She says, and she ends this with a very vulgar attack, that these clerks, these scholars are old men who cannot perform in bed, and because they keep their women unsatisfied and because they cannot perform in bed, they go on to become scholars, and once they become scholars, they say that women cannot keep the vow of marriage. But it is only their old age problems if they cannot get it up in bed and if they cannot perform in bed. So this is a very vulgar attack on women, on these scholars who are always men, and she ends this section with this attack. In the next section also, we try to understand how this misogyny in that medieval age worked, and we learn more about that book of misogyny and unfaithful wives in this prologue, in Wife of Bath's narrative, in that book that Jenkins had.